We're not taught to feel, but that doesn't mean that you should bypass your responsibility to learn how to feel. Join me, an emotional intelligence and human-centric innovation expert, Antesa Jensen, for a deep conversation that goes beyond the perceived parameters of transformational work to unveil how your internal landscape is impacting our world. In this episode, you'll learn what emotional intelligence truly is, the difference between being an empath and being someone with high emotional intelligence, how to heal through your feelings, and trust me, it's quicker than you think, how your inner transformation impacts our planet, and how to truly be free. Make sure you stick around until the end of the episode where Antesa drops a major love punch that will help you step into greatness. Antesa Jensen specializes in evoking and cultivating human potential through coaching, speaking, and workshop facilitation. She holds a deep understanding of human behavior, entropy, and its impact on innovation, and the essential ingredients required for sustainable and holistic transformation. Her mission is to guide businesses in fundamentally transforming their company cultures to be prepared for the unknown and predictably volatile future of the digital era. After a 12-year career in the financial industry, Antesa founded Adventure Awake, which serves to provide the motivated leaders and influencers she loves to guide with practical tools in uncovering their innate human potential in real time through real-life experiences. Today's episode is sponsored by my training, How to Conquer Your Bullshit with CPR. This training is built to help you step into the bravery needed to lead your purpose with conviction. If you're a purpose-driven leader and you're struggling to get your message out there, I highly encourage you to sign up for the free training at rubyfremont.com/CPR. Now it is time to dive into emotional intelligence with Antesa Jensen. Welcome to today's Thought Leader, where I'm challenging you to rise up, speak up, and create a movement. I'm your host, Ruby Fremont, and I'm here as a catalyst for you, the new generation of thought leaders. Join me every week as I dive into raw and real conversations that will help you amplify your presence, influence, and impact. Hey, thought leaders, I am back with another incredible guest, and I have a feeling that our conversation today is going to go deep beyond the perceived parameters of transformational work. So with that being said, I'm super happy to introduce you to Antesa Jensen. Antesa, welcome to today's Thought Leader. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here and to be on the show with you.
Yeah, it's interesting because we really just recently connected and you and I hopped on a really quick connection call. I have these connection calls before I do podcast conversations with people that I haven't met before. And I got to say, like, you intrigue me with your approach. You know, I think that there's 1,000,001 coaches out there. And I think that, right?
True story.
True story.
Yeah.
And we all have like our own flavor and we all have our own vibe. And there are those of us who are actually brave enough and courageous enough to bring that flavor and vibe to the forefront of the work that we do. And that's what differentiates us as coaches and as leaders. And I love the flavor and the vibe that you're bringing out into your work. So I don't want to have to explain it to everyone. Why don't we start here? Let's start with you explaining what you do.
Just give you the DL.
Yeah.
So I'm an emotional intelligence expert, and I'm also a specialist in what I call human-centric innovation. And people are always kind of like, what's that?
What's that?
So emotional intelligence is something that I think more people are familiar with. People talk about that on Harvard Business Review. New York Times is writing about it. You know, we have our intellectual intelligence, which is, you know, what we know to be the brain. Mm-hmm. And your emotional intelligence is kind of the heart language. It's the emotional language. It's your ability to read other people and what's happening for them on the inside. It's your ability also, this is something that is often overlooked with emotional intelligence, is to express what's happening for you as well. So someone who has a high level of emotional intelligence is both attuned to their own emotional experience as well as to other people's emotional experience.
Right.
Sometimes also their physical experience, because they can be both.
Right. So is that not the same as what people are as intuitive?
It is, except for there's a whole slew, and this is going to probably resonate with a lot of people who listen to your shows. There's a whole slew of people who consider themselves empaths, who can feel what's happening with other people, are not necessarily great at expressing what's happening with them, or their whole experience of being intuitive and empathic is a very victimized experience. And so they're at the mercy of feeling so much. And high levels of emotional intelligence means there's a lot of healing that happens, and you can feel without being hooked into what's happening around you. So
that's a really good differentiation.
Yeah. It's being empathetic to what's happening around you, but it's not being governed by it. So you can be around people who are having emotional experiences and you don't have to control it.
Oh, I love that. That brings.
So you can be empathic and be very not emotionally intelligent. Actually, it's very possible, and that's actually probably the most common form of empathy that we see in the world right now, because there's a lot of very sensitive people roaming around who haven't done their healing work.
Right.
So that's where EQ comes in, as far as I'm concerned.
Got it. And then, why is that work so important?
Well, so this is the content of the call. So as far as I'm concerned, one of the reasons that I put such a focus on emotional intelligence specifically is that very few of us growing up are taught to feel.
Right. 1,000%. Yes.
Right. Like we know how to, like, people are like, wait a second, I know how to feel. But my personal opinion, and this is based on hundreds of people that I work with, both privately in groups and corporations with children, is that people are very good at intellectualizing their emotional experience by being very attached to the story of what happened to them. But the actual pure emotion tends to get glossed over in that experience. And so we don't know how to purely experience anger. We know how to experience blame. We don't know how to experience anger. We know how to experience shame, but we don't know how to experience humility. And so for me, there's a huge difference between those things. And when we can actually dismantle the story from the emotional and physical sensation, healing happens, and it's profound and fast. Like an actual feeling lasts about 90 seconds. So if you're obsessing over something, chances are likely you haven't felt. You're fixated on the story, the victim story about it. Why this is important for me is that I consider myself a thought leader of humility, of the space between. So for me, everything is about space. The universe is 99.9% space. Right. And you can't feel space if you can't feel your own physical experience. And so it's the segue, if so to speak, of learning how to feel what's happening beyond you, to recognize our connection with ourselves, with other people, with the planet, which is what you and I talked about in our sort of intro call, is if you can't register your own felt experience, how are you supposed to register someone else's? And if you can't register someone else's, you certainly can't experience sort of the broader scope of what it means to be a human.
Right. And it's interesting because we have, and I'm sure you're seeing this too, because I'm seeing it, so many people rising to their call. Like their call to lead, their call to fulfill their purpose. And I've seen these people rush to let me try and understand and feel you, and let me try and understand and feel the world, and let me, I'm feeling so much of the world, and I'm feeling so much of this, and I want to fix this, and I'm doing my work to do this. And yet at the same time, they're bypassing their own inner work. Because to be honest, that shit's really fucking tough. Like that's the tough shit. right? It's like,
that's the real deal.
it's like dealing with our own shit, like dealing with our repressed anger, dealing with our repressed traumas, dealing with our repressed sadness, whatever it is, the shame, the guilt, the stuff that we're harboring, like actually being brave enough to come face to face with that.
Right.
And now that I'm on the other side of that, I'm incredibly devoted to my inner growth, which is why I do this work with my clients. I see how it makes sense.
Right.
But I know that there are people listening right now that may not even recognize that they're bypassing their work. Because I think that the industry, when I say industry, the personal development industry, I'm doing air quotes for those of you listening, the personal development industry, places like...
I don't know if you just saw that. I just did a gag me. The truth reveals itself. Keep going.
Right. But I feel like there's a rush for us to get better, or a rush for us to heal, or a rush for us to be all love and light and all this shit. And that's what's actually causing this, whether it's conscious or unconscious, this bypassing of like our own work. And what you just expressed is that, like, if we want the world to change as much as we say we want it to, then it all really does start with our own inner work.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I regularly come up against, and as a recovering know-it-all, I feel like I can say this with full integrity. And I'm not joking. Like, anyone who knows me, like I was like, referred to as the walking TED Talk years ago. Because I am a gatherer, I'm a Gemini, I'm a gatherer of information. I'm a voracious learner. I love information. Mm-hmm. And what I see and what you're pointing to especially in like the coaching industry, mm-hmm. Is like everyone's a goddamn expert.
Right.
And what's also happening is that the digital era is kind of making its name in the world. Mm-hmm. And so what I see is that, we're surrounded by information. Information's available everywhere. It's no longer valuable to have information. What I also see is that our capacity to understand an experience does not equate our capacity to be with an experience. Mm. They're two very, very separate things. And talk therapy has, for all intents and purposes, I think it has some value, but what it has also done is it's told people you're healed because you understand why something happened. Mm-hmm. But learning how to control your environment and avoid triggers does not equal healing. And understanding why you got triggered, because maybe when you were 5, your parents ignored you and you cried yourself to sleep or whatever, like that's awareness is an important first step to healing and to recovering your nervous system, mm-hmm. but it does not a healed human make. Mm. And what I see is really, really important is that, if we're not careful as individual human beings, is that we're very easily swept away by the swiftness with which we are being introduced to new, endless supplies of information, somehow being diluted into the fact that that is where the value is. And so then we say, I need to have information too. I need to also be an expert in order to keep up with that. Yeah. But what I see, and this is my own projection into the future, is that what is going to be our future currency is the not knowing. It's the humility. It's the capacity to listen. It's the capacity to hear and feel the space, because that's not something that a robot can ever do. It's not mm-hmm. something that you can replace. Like what we don't know is infinite, mm-hmm. And we have all these ideas about the world, but what we don't know about the world is where all the innovation is going to be revealed. And so I say that that innovation and humility are siblings, because you have to be curious in order to truly innovate. Otherwise, you're recreating the wheel. Everyone wants to be the next Airbnb. Right. Everyone wants to be the next Uber. Right. No, like be the next you. Like Tesla wasn't like, I want to be the next Airbnb. Right. Tesla was like, I want to be the next Tesla. I want to be the next whatever. Like it's just... We have this idea that if we piggyback on someone else's bright idea that, we'll be able to do it. And that's what I see a lot of the coaches is like, I'm going to show you how I did it so that you mm-hmm. can do the same thing. Mm-hmm. But a true coach is, I'm going to show you what you don't know about yourself so that you can do it your way and create that.
Amen.
And, you know, like that for me is what true coaching is. And I think that's where people have it a little bit backwards.
Yeah. It's like the difference between a coach and a consultant.
Totally. Totally. I write about this all the time because people are like, give me advice. And I'm like, I don't give advice.
Right.
Sorry. Yeah. You don't want my advice. You don't want my life. So if I tell you how to live my life, then you would be inauthentic, and authenticity is what's going to make you money. Authenticity is what's going to have you be fulfilled. It's going to have you feel successful. It's going to make you happy and joyful. That's, you know, you being in alignment with you is what we want. So I'm not the expert on your life. You are, right? So it's kind of a side tangent to all of these other things. But for me, you know, the thriving to be an expert, the thrive to understand, to need to know how everything works. Like, no, be a woman, be a man, be whatever other gender you identify with, like be a human being, and let that govern and guide your next steps from a place of not knowing, from a place of curiosity. You know, like it's so much more simple than we think it needs to be. And if we just remove all the layers, we can get to that.
Right.
And a lot of people are busy adding stuff on.
Right. And when we look at that in terms of the planet and the collective,
right?
What is the impact of both? Like those who are just like trying to add, and those who are really looking to shed and uncover who they truly are. Like, what's the impact of both?
So I think that we have this idea that more is more. And then there are this sort of new age spiritual people who are like, less is more.
Right.
And then I follow the path of enough attracts more in terms of growth. And that leads you towards the inward journey of uncovering the layers so that you realize that you as at your essence, like without body, without story, without childhood trauma, without first ex-boyfriend or girlfriend who broke your heart, like who you are at your essence is enough. And so when I work with my clients, everything that I do is grooming them to know that they, who they are, regardless of what's going on with them, are enough. They are good enough. They are smart enough. They are beautiful enough. They are love enough to have whatever it is that they want. And then determining what they want and where they've been conditioned to want things that they actually don't want, you know, like learning how to strip away those layers.
Right.
As it pertains to the planet and to the collective, you know, one of the things I like to tell people is human, the root of the word human is humus, which means of the earth. And we have this idea, and I think, you know, you live in a metropolitan area and so do I, and, you know, you're not necessarily like swarmed by nature.
Right.
I think anyone who ever goes out into nature, it's like you walk into the woods and you're like, oh, I can breathe.
Right.
And what I see happening in nature is reflecting who we are. And so our system immediately drops into resonance. And when I say our system drops into resonance, what I mean is the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems are functioning in resonance. One's not dominating the energy in our bodies. And most of us, excuse me, most of us in the Western world are sympathetic dominant, which is to say high stress. So the sympathetic nervous system is the stress markers. It's the fight, flight, freeze. And the parasympathetic is the calming, calm down part of our nervous system. Yeah. And they both occupy energy in our bodies. And so when they're out of balance, we are creating dissonance, and dissonance affects the greater nervous system. It affects our hormonal system. It affects our immune system. It creates illness, truly. Like, you know, you probably have talked to many people who had their big awakening moment because they got sick. That's a really, really common eye-opening experience for people. It's like all of a sudden they start having health problems, and then they start paying attention because their body is like, hold on a second, you need to slow down. Yeah. You know, or they get in an accident because they're projecting a lot of nervous, dissonant energy out into the world, and the world will reflect that back. And when we're connected when we know that we're connected to the earth, we are energetically entangled with the planet. So we're not just living on the planet, we are a part of the planet. And so even if we live in a city and we think that we're separate and we're just occupying an apartment or, you know, whatever, like the truth of the matter is that we are an extension of the earth. And so look at how many people are suffering from sickness, from stress, from illness, in the world right now, for me, it's no wonder that the world is overheating. It's just not shocking to me at all. And so the opposite is also true. If we start to do the work to heal ourselves, that could be the new technology we're looking for to cool the system down in the earth as well. And that's my whole theory, is like, if you can actually do the work to learn how to get your system into resonance, to fully functioning into resonance, that functions like a ripple effect, because then your system becomes calming salve for the systems around you. And I have personally experienced that. People sometimes, to my dismay, because I attract a lot of people who are high energy, high nervous energy, but the ripple effect of my presence calms a room down. I can energetically smooth a room out. And when you put a lot of people like that into a room or into an environment, into a city, you can actually have a massive impact on the environment around it. There are studies about this actually being done.
Right. Why don't we talk about that? Because I know there's so much that you're sharing where, like, we've heard some level of this in social media or whatever. And I really want to ground it into reality so our listeners can truly understand the impact that their inner landscape has on our world.
Yeah. So where this came to the forefront for me is, I don't know if you've heard of the SDGs. I actually can't remember exactly what that acronym stands for, but it's the 17 global climate initiatives. I live in Copenhagen, where they're very like green and carbon conscious here, and so it's just like it's on every, like, in the recent elections. That's all they talked about was, are we setting ourselves up, our economy up for that? And what I see often in the individual is like, those things are great, and what am I supposed to do about that?
Right.
Like, yes, you can stop using plastic straws.
Yeah.
Yes, you can, turn your lights off.
Right. Yes, you can get an electric car.
You can get an electric car. And on the grand scheme of things, the individual impact could potentially, like, I've actually part of a roundtable which shows what the impact of that is. And it's actually relatively small when the individual changes their habits. It's more large corporations that need to change the way that they're producing materials, the way that they're running businesses. In Denmark, one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases here is Maersk, which is one of the largest companies in the country. And when you see, I don't know if you've seen that map of the top 10 contributors to global warming.
No, I haven't.
Well, Maersk is one of them, because they're the largest shipping company in the world, and they have fuel, and their shipping stuff is going to the ocean, and the ocean's killing the phytoplankton. The phytoplankton produce 50% of the oxygen on the planet. So, just like, there's just a lot, right? And so, like, as an individual, you're like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do about that?
Right.
Like,
and then that usually leaves people into that, well, fuck it, I'm just not going to do anything.
Totally.
Or I'm just going to switch to glass straws.
Right. Because,
and share it all over,
great, by the way.
And share it all over social media. Look at me doing.
Look at my glass straw.
Look at my glass straw.
I love my glass straw.
I do too. Actually, I have 4.
And the little cleaner that goes in it brings me absolute joy. But when I can rest easy knowing that me doing my inner work is having actually an impact on the people around me in my environment, I actually feel like I'm making a difference. And I really truly believe that one of our innate human needs is to feel like we're making an impact on the world around us. We're all here to be actualized in service.
Right. So Maslow got it wrong because he forgot to add that.
Well, that's actualization at the top, right?
True. Yeah, that is true.
So I love talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs too, because a lot of people who are really spiritually evolved think that being spiritually evolved is having no needs. And actually it's having very refined needs.
Right.
And I'm like, listen, like, I use Beyonce as an example because it's totally relatable. But like, if you see her Lemonade album, that woman has done her inner work.
Yeah.
And she has like a team of 30 people taking care of her.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I think that with the whole needs situation, first of all, listeners, it's okay to have needs.
Totally.
Hello. Like, totally okay to have needs. Maslow got it right.
It's important to know what your needs are.
To recognize what they are, to be aware of them, to acknowledge them, and to like really allow yourself to embrace them. Yeah.
Yes. I actually think that in order to be of service in the world, you have to have enough of your own innate value to know that your needs matter. And not just like having a roof over my head, having food and water. It's
Right.
like, no, like if you want to live in an involved and expansive place, you might need more than that. And that's perfectly okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're living in alignment with those sorts of things, you are energetically able to be more generous. And like for me, like one of my, like a piece of my essence, I love to like pour love into people. It feels so good for me. Like I feel like I have tendrils on my heart and they just come
Mm-hmm.
like out, and I love it. I like to feed people. Like I'm like a mama, you know?
Yeah.
And so like nurturing is my jam. I can't do that if I'm empty.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I don't take care of my needs, I don't get to be in my essence.
Mm-hmm.
And being in my essence is healing for the people around me and healing for the world. And so if I don't take care of myself, I don't get to be of service.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of dispels that whole rescuer thing of like, I just need to give. Like,
Right.
no,
I need to
you
save the
can't.
planet. I need to save
Yeah.
people. I need to raise consciousness. I need to do all this. It's like, okay,
Right.
great. And what are you doing for yourself?
Yeah. Like have that mission, but you can't, you know, I worked with a shaman in Gabon earlier this year, and she says this very in her, you know, she's like one of the 13 grandmothers of the world. She's like 87 years old, persnickety as fuck. And she's been around, you know, she's been doing shaman work with one of the most potent plant medicines in the world for like 60 years. And she says, you can't give until you get.
Mm-hmm.
You have to receive first. And in order for you to receive, you have to remove the layers in order to be able to receive. On a purely spiritual level, but like energetically, emotionally, if your emotional needs aren't being met, you can't give someone else their emotional needs. That is dysfunctional. That's enmeshment. That's codependent.
But that also goes against the idea of the selfless servant, which is kind of what like a lot of religions,
like bodhisattva vows
right. And it's like, I don't understand that at all. And yet we have like this whole new rising of leaders who are like, no, fuck all this shit that I need to do for myself. I'm here to move the collective forward. I'm here to help humanity. So I'm going to serve. And then what? Like, what about you? What about your needs? What about your growth? What about how your energy is actually contributing to the planet? Because eventually you're going to end up burning out. Eventually you're going to end up.
It's totally true. And I think that you see that a lot. And personally, I take a high level of responsibility and being an embodied example of what it looks like to have boundaries, what it looks like to take care of myself so that people can see like what personal responsibility looks like, because you can't learn those things through reading about them. You have to experience them. You have to experience compassion. And my ability to do all of those things comes from me very painstakingly and very difficultly. And difficulty is not really a word. At times, I'm normally very eloquent with my language, but it required a lot of work. Like it was super hard for me to have boundaries for a really long time. I didn't learn those growing up. I learned that my boundaries were going to be violated no matter what I did. I learned betrayal. I learned violation. Like I had to learn how to not be severely codependent. And I still am a very, very sensitive, like I'm, you know, highly sensitive person. Ain't got shit on me. Like I feel everything. I can hear people's thoughts, you know? And so if I didn't learn how to deal with those gifts, they end up being a source of manipulation and control. You're not free if that's the way you're governed in your life. And everyone wants to feel free. And the way to be free is to rid yourself of the burden of thinking you need to know everything. You know, it's to let go of this idea that there's only right or wrong. For example, you know, like there is no right or wrong. Right or wrong is dysfunction. You know, there's obviously integrity and there's truth, but like, there's this idea that, you know, there are wrong people and there are right people, and I want to be on the right side. Right. And those things keep us shackled. Yeah. And we all want to feel free. We all want to feel freedom of movement. We associate certain lifestyles with that. Like everyone wants to be a nomad now. Right. Like you can still be shackled even if you're living in Bali eating papaya for breakfast every day.
Yeah. And in fact, most people are.
Yes. In fact, most people are. And freedom, you know, like Nelson Mandela was free. He was in prison and he was free.
He was free.
You know, like that's what we really, you know, we can aspire to. And I think that people are looking for the get rich quick shortcut, whatever. And there are no shortcuts for that. You know, like you can be gifted. Like I was born with a high level of sensitivity and intuition. Some of it was even more developed because I grew up in a dysfunctional environment where I needed to be aware of everything at all times. But I didn't get to make use of those gifts until I started to heal. I didn't get to actually, like now they are my power source and my fuel source when I work with my clients because they feel seen and heard by me no matter what. But I couldn't use those even in my early days as a coach because I was still healing. I would basically like, punch them in the face with truth, and that didn't work. You know, like I could see all the things that I could see, and it still wasn't helpful for them. Yeah. And now I know how to help people without hanging myself out to dry. And for me, like I'm deeply connected to nature. I'm all about like leave no trace, keep things in better, or leave things in better condition than you found them. The earth is my mama, you know, like I want to take good care of her, and I can't do that if I'm not taking care of myself. And when I take care of myself, I am taking care of her because we are the same. We are both, we're entangled, you know? So that's like my whole shtick. Right. You know, that's my why. And, you know, if I can help other people remove the layers and the barriers that are getting in the way of them having that experience, you know, this is what ecstasy feels like. This is freedom. And I want everyone to know that. Yeah. And it's powerful, and that's powerful work. And it's the work that's really needed, especially now where we're at as human beings living in a very digital age, also living in a very scary time with the state of the planet. People feeling helpless or hopeless, or like they're not able to really contribute something, or people wanting to play the martyr, or people wanting to be the selfless servant. And it's like, no, all of this begins within. What would happen? Imagine what would happen if every single person on this planet did their inner work. Like imagine the impact that would have. It'd be huge. Because you can still use a glass straw. Like everyone on the planet could still use glass straws and still be like fucking assholes and not do their own inner work, and their energy is still impacting the planet, right? Like sure, we remove plastic straws and the energy piece is still there energetically. It's crazy because I know like a lot of people talk about energy. A lot of people talk about how like attracts like this is known now. Like we just know this. And it's interesting to introduce the idea of, and this also impacts the energy of our planet, our home. Yeah. You know, like energy is all the same. Right. And it's all connected. It's all connected. We have the possibility, if we choose to function like those starling birds, you know, where we can communicate. Like I call it the original Wi-Fi is like the limbic system. Once upon a time, that was how people were able to communicate. Like, how did you find your grandparents when you planned to meet on a street corner at 7:00? You showed up at 7:05. They waited. You found each other. Like, there's a whole generation, 2 generations now of kids who can't function without Google Maps and you know, Facebook Messenger or whatever. And there's something I wanted to say about what you spoke to, which I think is really important. And I'm sure that, you know, you've got a lot of high performing, you know, overachievers. I'm an overachiever too. Listening to this podcast being like, yeah. And I know a lot of people who don't want to change. Right. And the reality is when you're really breaking it down scientifically to the nervous system, there are people whose dissonance between the parasympathetic and nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems is so great that in order to go through a traditional standard transformational process of starting to look at your own material is actually too stressful. There isn't enough energy store in order for them to do it. And so that's when you have like your parents who just don't get it and they don't want to, and they're not interested. Like I know so many people who have that dynamic with their parents. I work with businesses. There are tons of people in organizations who just want to be dead weight and retire, and they want you to just lay off.
Yeah.
And the reality is that for those people, transformation, as we know it to be, which is doing the work, is too great a task. And I have conversations now with people who are in the science of, astrophysics and quantum biology. Those are some of the people that I hang out with these days. And what we're talking about is, how do you initiate true transcendence for the people who do not have the energy stores for a transformational journey? Because like, you think like the hero's journey, like there's going to be struggle. Right. And there are some people who just don't have the capacity for struggle. Yeah. They literally don't have the space in their body for it. It will break them down too much, and they won't ever recover. And so for those people, you need transcendence. And so those who have the energy to go through a transformational journey and to reach the moment of transcendence, of actualization, of, affiliation with one another and cooperation and collaboration in that way, those people have the possibility to energetically polarize people into transcendence who might otherwise never transform. So you can literally energetically pick them up and bring them up to this new level. And then they have to learn how to live there. Obviously, they need to learn, I call it the practicalities of transcendence. They need to learn how to continue to maintain themselves in that state. They need to learn how to have needs. They need to learn how to express themselves. But you can actually energetically give them that through a massive amount of people coming together, and energetically you can uplift someone. Right. It's possible to shift someone in that way. So that's what I say to that question. And no doubt someone on this podcast is listening to that. For sure. Is that, transformation for me is old school. Like now it's like, how do we transcend? How do we heal and transcend? Because the transformational journey, we ain't got time for that shit no more. Right. Transformational journey takes years. Yeah. And so the next step is transcend. The next step is heal and transcend, and then learn tools and the practical tools of that, emotional expression, learning how to feel. Those are really, really important so that the expansion can happen.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And being like undeniably devoted to that practice day in and day out, like not having it be something that you kind of do when you feel like doing it, or when you're inspired to do, right? Like it's just, this is your way of being. Yeah. 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 And if you're a person listening to this who hasn't had that kind of experience, I like to say, if you want it hard enough, you'll find it. And, you may not even know what you're looking for, but if you start looking, the thing that you need will find you. Yeah. And that for me it was certainly how I found my own journey. Is I just said, I need a change. And I was willing to acknowledge that I had no idea what that change was. I didn't even know how to Google it. I just knew I don't want to stay where I am anymore. That was all I could say. Is I couldn't ask Google, where do I go? And sure enough, I would meet people who introduced me to meditation. I started getting involved with the coaching industry. I hired my first coach for thousands and thousands of dollars, and it changed my life. And, I was going through an awakening at the time. It was painful, and I was willing to do whatever it took. And if you want to change your life and you're willing to do whatever it takes, the resources will avail themselves to you. Yeah. I love that. I love that. We are at the end of this episode. Conversation was flowing hard, and I know we went deep. So to our listeners, thank you for listening. Antesa, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with our listeners? Yeah. So kind of alluding to, or relaying back to what we were talking about earlier about everyone being an expert, is that, people are really trying to be masters these days. And what I know to be true is that masters that are real masters are developing their mastery by allowing themselves to regularly be humbled by their humanity. And if we're not in a hurry to be great, we will become great. And that's, for me, that's kind of my final thought, is allow yourself to be human. That's where the freedom lies. Yeah, I love that. If we're not in a hurry to be great, we'll be great. Yeah. I love that. Antesa, thank you so much for it's my pleasure. Here on today's Thought Leader. I'm going to have all your links in the show notes, but why don't you just verbally tell our audience how they can track you down, how they can stalk you online? Where do you like to hang out? I'm on all the social medias. I am also the only Antesa Jensen
to my knowledge on the planet. So if you Google me
Perfect.
and you find all the things, but I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. Are there more social medias than that? No, yeah, that's it. I think.
Awesome. Awesome. And she also has a freebie. We love freebies.
Mm-hmm.
A worksheet that can be a powerful tool for you. So I'll have that link in the show notes as well. Antesa, thank you so much for bringing
It's my
your
pleasure.
wisdom,
Thank
for
you for
sharing your
having me.
presence. I really, really appreciate you. And I know that this conversation is going to really shift people's perspectives on their own inner growth and healing work. So
Amazing.
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Today's Thought Leader, where we are challenging you to rise up, speak up, and create a movement. If you dig this conversation between me and Antesa, please share it with a friend. And don't forget to download a few episodes and drop a rating and hit subscribe. So if you have any questions about our conversation today, we would love to hear from you. So hit us up on social media and ask your questions. Let us know that you listened to this episode. Let us know what your biggest insights and takeaways were. We would love to hear from you. And I will see you back here on Thursday for a fresh new episode of Today's Thought Leader.